In 1684, a Vatican envoy arrived at a secluded monastery in southern Italy under the cover of night. He carried no weapons, wore no official garments, and spoke to no one except the abbot behind locked doors. Witnesses described his arrival as silent and almost spectral. He stayed less than an hour. When he left, he took with him a single object, an ancient manuscript wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax. The monks were forbidden to speak of it. The manuscript was never seen again. According to a suppressed letter found decades later in a private Jesuit archive, this book was unlike any other. It was not simply heretical, it was dangerous. It did not deny God, but redefined him. It challenged the Church's authority not through blasphemy, but by exposing a version of early Christian history that contradicted the official narrative. The manuscript claimed that Lucifer was not the enemy, but a misunderstood being of light. It suggested that the war in heaven was not rebellion, but revolution. It named the true architects of creation, hinted at celestial hierarchies erased from canon, and revealed that the material world itself may have been forged by a lesser, jealous deity. It was called the Gospel of the Watchers, and it was said to be older than the Book of Genesis. Its pages contained visions, coded names, and a map of divine lineage that diverged entirely from the Bible. Multiple sources indicate that fragments survived, hidden in apocryphal texts, quoted in the margins of forbidden grimoires, and whispered about in esoteric circles for centuries. The Vatican has never acknowledged the book's existence, but its actions speak louder than denials. Why would the most powerful religious institution on earth go to such lengths to retrieve a manuscript unless it posed a threat not just to doctrine, but to control itself? This is not just the story of a lost book. This is a story of a truth buried beneath centuries of fire, silence, and fear. A truth they never wanted you to read. To understand the threat posed by the so-called Gospel of the Watchers, we must look beyond the myths and examine the machinery of early Christianity, how it evolved from a scattered movement of persecuted believers into an institutionalized power, structure determined to shape not just faith, but history itself. By the early 4th century, the Christian world was in disarray. Dozens of gospels circulated among different sects. Some believed in a purely spiritual Christ, others in a fully human prophet. Some saw Lucifer as an agent of divine justice, while others demonized him entirely. The emerging church, newly empowered by Emperor Constantine and eager to unify doctrine under one imperial theology, saw this diversity not as richness, but as threat. Heresy was no longer an academic disagreement. It was now treason. At the First Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, bishops and political envoys gathered to decide which books would be included in the official canon. But this was not a peaceful debate. It was a battle of ideology and control. Many gospels revered by early communities were condemned, not because of provable falsehoods, but because they offered alternate versions of divinity, cosmology, and salvation. The Gospel of Thomas, for example, presented Jesus as a mystic teacher who spoke in riddles and denied the necessity of organized worship. The Gospel of Mary offered a vision of divine feminine authority. And then, whispered in the shadows, referenced but never quoted aloud, there was another, the Gospel of the Watchers. This text, according to early church historians like Irenaeus and Tertullian, was considered so volatile that simply owning a copy could lead to excommunication, or worse. It was said to contain revelations received by Enoch, the 7th patriarch after Adam, a figure shrouded in mystery even in canonical texts. Enoch was one of only 2 biblical figures said to have been taken to heaven without dying. In some Jewish apocrypha, he is transformed into the archangel Metatron. But the version of Enoch found in the Gospel of the Watchers presented an entirely different worldview. It described a pre-Adamic civilization watched over by divine beings known as the Watchers, beings who descended not to corrupt but to guide humanity. These beings were later vilified, cast out, and blamed for the fall. But in this forbidden context, they were portrayed as luminous entities who brought knowledge, art, agriculture, and science to early mankind, echoing the tale of Prometheus, who defied the gods to give fire to humans. The implications were staggering. If true, it meant that what the church labeled as demonic was once considered divine, that Lucifer and the fallen angels were not adversaries of God, but victims of a celestial coup, rewritten by the victors of a cosmic war. To allow such an idea to circulate was to invite chaos into the theological order, and so, the councils moved swiftly. Scrolls were burned, authors were anathematized, Libraries were raided and manuscripts sealed in underground crypts. The Library of Alexandria, which may have held copies of texts like the Gospel of the Watchers, was destroyed in successive waves of conquest, fire, and deliberate neglect. In the centuries that followed, the Church not only shaped which books survived, but how we think about truth itself. The very idea of divine revelation was monopolized. Only sanctioned texts, filtered through imperial councils and papal decrees, could be trusted. Everything else, every competing narrative, every whisper of divine pluralism, every trace of the Watchers, was declared heretical and erased from memory. But memory is not so easily destroyed. The Desert Fathers of Egypt preserved fragments. Gnostic sects in Syria passed oral traditions. In Ethiopia, the Book of Enoch survived in full, even as it vanished from Western Christian theology. And in rare coded references within medieval grimoires and alchemical manuscripts, the Watchers remained, nameless, faceless, but not forgotten. This is the forbidden context, not simply a question of lost books, but of a deliberate campaign of spiritual censorship, one that reshaped the foundation of Western religion. The Gospel of the Watchers was not an accidental omission. It was purged, because it offered a mirror too clear, a vision too bright, a truth too dangerous to be allowed into the light. And yet, like buried embers, it continues to glow beneath the surface. Waiting. The text known as the Gospel of the Watchers occupies a unique and deeply unsettling place in the shadow history of religion. Unlike the canonical Gospels that recount the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, this manuscript reaches deeper into the primordial past, beyond the Garden of Eden, beyond even the creation of man, as narrated in Genesis. It proposes that humanity's true origins were shaped not solely by God, but by a pantheon of celestial intelligences, beings who descended to Earth in an age now forgotten and intervened in the development of human civilization. These entities, known as the Watchers, are briefly mentioned in the Book of Enoch and alluded to cryptically in Genesis 6:4 as the sons of God, who took human wives and fathered the Nephilim. But in this lost gospel, the Watchers are not portrayed as defilers or traitors. They are depicted as beings of light, wisdom, and sorrow, cosmic outcasts who broke divine law not out of lust, but out of compassion. The narrative of the Gospel of the Watchers begins not on earth, but in the higher realms of existence. It speaks of a celestial order, a council of archonic powers presiding over creation. Yahweh is presented not as the supreme and singular creator, but as one among many divine authorities, each assigned dominion over different realms and species. Among these celestial rulers, the Watchers were assigned to observe the unfolding of life on earth. But they did more than observe. They taught. They gave language, mathematics, healing arts, agriculture, astronomy, metallurgy, and even the hidden knowledge of spirit and soul. They broke the prime directive, intervention, and for that, they were cast down. This gospel paints their fall not as rebellion, but as sacrifice. It claims that the Watchers interceded in a moment of crisis, when early mankind was manipulated by hostile powers, intent on keeping humanity in ignorance and spiritual bondage. The Watchers brought fire, both literal and symbolic. They awakened consciousness in a species not yet aware of its own potential. They revealed the divine image within man, a spark that the ruling powers wished to suppress. But by giving mankind this knowledge, they violated the law of non-interference and were condemned. Their leader, referred to in veiled terms as "he who reflects the light," is identified in later interpretations as Lucifer. But unlike the later medieval image of a monstrous Satan, here he is described as radiant, mournful, and wise. A being who did not seek to overthrow God, but to offer humanity the freedom to choose its own destiny. The Watchers were pursued and hunted across the planes of existence. Some were imprisoned in the deep places of the earth, a reference scholars believe could be linked to the abyss or Tartarus. Others were erased from memory through ritual, fire, and ecclesiastical decree. But their teachings endured, scattered among secret schools and hidden orders, encoded in symbols, buried in myth. The Gospel claims that humanity's great leap forward in consciousness, from primitive survival to complex culture, was not a natural evolution, but the result of forbidden intervention. It suggests that the Watchers seeded humanity with something the higher powers feared: divine self-awareness. The text is structured not as a continuous narrative, but as a series of visions and dialogues, reminiscent of prophetic books like Daniel or Revelation. Enoch serves as the conduit, taken up into the heavens, where he bears witness to the great rebellion and the sorrow of the Watchers. He is shown the secret architecture of the cosmos, the names of the stars and their angelic governors, the boundaries between dimensions, and the origins of evil, not as sin, but as imbalance and division. The Gospel ends with a cryptic warning that the Watchers will return when mankind once again teeters on the edge of spiritual extinction. Not as saviors, not as gods, but as reminders of a path not taken. A path toward inner illumination, forbidden by those who claim to speak for God. No complete version of the Gospel of the Watchers has ever been found. What remains are fragments, cited in Gnostic commentaries, hidden in the footnotes of medieval grimoires, echoed in the mystic traditions of Kabbalah, Hermeticism, and Sufi cosmology. The Ethiopian Book of Enoch preserves some parallel accounts, but it is clear from comparative analysis that the Gospel of the Watchers was a more radical and theologically subversive work. Its complete destruction was not due to obscurity, but to intent. The Church feared it not because it was irrelevant, but because it threatened the very architecture of divine authority. It revealed a narrative in which angels disobeyed not out of pride, but out of love. In which knowledge was not the fruit of sin, but the catalyst for liberation, and in which the enemy of the Church's God was not evil incarnate, but a teacher, silenced and reviled for daring to lift the veil. This gospel did not ask humanity to worship the Watchers, it asked humanity to remember them. It suggested that we too could ascend, that the divine was not locked behind temple walls or guarded by clergy, but already present within us, buried, exiled, forgotten, just like the text itself. This is the heart of the Gospel of the Watchers. A revelation too dangerous to preserve, and too powerful to fully erase. A text that continues to haunt the margins of our spiritual history, whispering of a time when heaven fell not out of hatred, but hope. What the canonical Church condemned as blasphemy, the occult traditions preserved as sacred truth. The Gospel of the Watchers, while obliterated from official records, left behind traces, resonant echoes within mystical systems that spanned continents and centuries. Gnosticism, Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and later Western esotericism all reflect fragments of its cosmology, buried beneath layers of symbolism, allegory, and encoded metaphysics. To the outsider, these systems appear obscure or contradictory, but for the initiated, they form a coherent alternative history of the cosmos, one that begins not with divine unity, but with a rupture, a concealment, and a forgotten war in heaven. In Gnostic thought, the material world is not a perfect creation of a benevolent God, but a flawed prison fashioned by a lesser, ignorant being known as the Demiurge. This being, sometimes equated with the Old Testament Yahweh, is not the ultimate source of divinity but a usurper, an archonic figure who traps souls in matter and enforces blind obedience. The true divine source, known as the Pleroma, exists beyond the veil of the physical cosmos. It is from this higher realm that emanations, or aeons, descend, each representing aspects of divine consciousness. One of these aeons, Sophia, embodies wisdom and yearning. Her fall from the Pleroma sets into motion the creation of the material world and the imprisonment of divine sparks within human bodies. Within this framework, the Watchers are not fallen angels but emissaries of higher knowledge. Their descent mirrors that of Sophia, driven not by pride but by compassion and the desire to restore balance. They act as intermediaries, bringing forbidden knowledge to awaken the divine essence within humanity. The punishment of the Watchers is not divine justice but archonic vengeance, retribution for violating the cosmic quarantine imposed by the false god. The knowledge they deliver, astronomy, healing, metallurgy, language, is not just technological but symbolic. Each gift corresponds to an inner transformation, a stage in the awakening of the soul from its material slumber. This esoteric interpretation found fertile ground in the Kabbalistic tradition, particularly in the concept of the Qliphoth, the shadow side of the Tree of Life. According to Lurianic Kabbalah, the process of creation involved divine vessels scattering sparks of light throughout the material world. The mission of the initiated is to perform tikkun, the restoration, by retrieving these sparks. The Watchers, in this sense, are early agents of tikkun, beings who prematurely attempted to heal the fracture between heaven and earth and were punished for it. The Qliphoth, often demonized, can be seen not simply as evil shells, but as distorted aspects of suppressed truths guarded by the Church's anathema. In Hermeticism, too, the Watcher's influence persists. The Emerald Tablet, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, declares that, as above, so below, a central axiom that bridges the celestial and the terrestrial, the macrocosm and the microcosm. This philosophy views the human being as a reflection of the divine order, capable of ascent through gnosis, alchemy, and inner purification. The Watchers, then, are the original Hermetic guides, revealing the correspondences between the stars and the soul, the body and the heavens. Their descent is an alchemical operation, a divine catalyst intended to transmute the base nature of humanity into spiritual gold. The Church labeled this sorcery, but occultists recognized it as sacred science. Renaissance occultists such as Agrippa, Paracelsus, and John Dee, though careful to veil their language, drew heavily from these suppressed currents. Dee's Enochian system of angelic communication, received through scrying and magical ritual, was believed to access the very languages and hierarchies preserved in the lost gospel. He and his scryer, Edward Kelly, believed they were being contacted by beings who existed outside the rigid angel-demon binary. These entities, many of which bore similarities to Watcher names found in Enochian literature, delivered complex cosmological diagrams, elemental keys, and encrypted revelations, much of which defied church orthodoxy. Dee considered these communications vital for the spiritual restoration of mankind. The Watchers had returned, in whispers and visions, to those who dared to listen. The occult truth behind the gospel of the Watchers is not limited to metaphysical doctrine. It touches every corner of human history, from the building of megalithic structures to the myths of civilizing gods found in Sumer, Egypt, Mesoamerica, and beyond. The Apkallu of Mesopotamia, the Neteru of Egypt, the Viracochas of the Andes, all describe luminous beings who descended from the heavens, imparted wisdom, and vanished after being betrayed or rejected. These parallel myths suggest a common source, a memory encoded into the human psyche, recurring across cultures as a distorted recollection of the Watcher's intervention. Even the symbol of the serpent, so often associated with Satan in Christian doctrine, is reinterpreted in occult traditions. The serpent is the bearer of wisdom, the awakener of Kundalini, the coiled energy within the spine that ascends toward divine union. In the book of Genesis, the serpent offers the fruit of knowledge, and humanity is punished. But in Gnostic readings, this act is seen as liberation. The serpent is a figure of the Watchers, agents of illumination, not corruption. Their sin was to offer freedom in a world ruled by control. This inversion of good and evil, so central to the occult interpretation, is precisely what made the gospel of the Watchers unacceptable to the Church. If the so-called fallen were in fact the first saviors, and if the jealous God was a usurper, then the entire structure of ecclesiastical authority collapses. The Church depends on a clear dichotomy: obedience to God as righteousness, disobedience as sin. But the gospel proposes that divine truth requires transgression, that sometimes, to reveal the light, one must rebel against the throne. In this light, the exile of the Watchers becomes not a story of damnation, but of sacrifice. Their descent was not a fall, but a mission. Their punishment, not a judgment, but a silencing. And the truth they brought, hidden in symbols, scattered in ruins, preserved in the secret doctrines of mystics and initiates, continues to smolder beneath the dogma. The occult truth behind the gospel of the Watchers is not a tale of evil defeated. It is a suppressed genesis, a spiritual inheritance stolen from the world and buried beneath fear, fire, and centuries of holy war. And yet, it endures. In the texts, they could not burn. In the dreams, they could not control. In the seekers who still remember. Despite the violent efforts of the early Church to erase the gospel of the Watchers from existence, scattered pieces of its message have survived, not just in ancient texts or secret traditions, but within modern institutions that have spent centuries suppressing, hiding, or reinterpreting them. This suppression has not been accidental or passive. It has been active, calculated, and systematic, driven by a fear deeper than heresy. The fear that if humanity were to reclaim the truth, the entire foundation of institutional religion would collapse. The Vatican, above all other bodies, has played a central role in this effort, guarding what it deems dangerous knowledge behind the fortified walls of its secret archives. The Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum, commonly known as the Vatican Secret Archives, is a sprawling vault of history's most sensitive and controversial documents. Stretching over 50 miles of shelves, it houses countless manuscripts, correspondences, and codices that the public has never seen. Among these are known to exist texts relating to banned apocrypha, early Christian sects, and so-called heretical movements. In the 19th and 20th centuries, multiple independent scholars, including Jesuits and theologians from outside the Catholic tradition, have reported encountering references to a gospel or record associated with the Watchers, though direct access to such documents has remained tightly restricted. Only high-ranking clergy, papal historians, and Vatican-approved researchers are permitted entry, and even then, only to specific pre-approved documents. Requests for access to documents related to Enochian writings or forbidden angelology are routinely denied without explanation. One of the few windows into this hidden world came from a leaked letter, dated 1923, from a French Dominican scholar who claimed to have seen a Latin copy of Evangelium Vigilantium, the Gospel of the Watchers, hidden within a sealed cabinet marked with the insignia of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, formerly known as the Inquisition. According to his description, the document was incomplete, bound in red leather, and accompanied by marginal notes warning of its theological danger. His account was never verified, and shortly after making his claim public, he was excommunicated and discredited. Some believe he was silenced. Others think the letter itself was part of a larger psyop, intended to draw attention away from the real location of such texts. But suppression has not been limited to the Vatican. In the academic world, any attempt to seriously explore the Watchers as more than literary metaphor is swiftly dismissed. Scholars who investigate parallels between Enochian literature, Gnostic cosmology, and modern esoteric traditions often find themselves marginalized, denied tenure, or accused of pseudoscience. This is not merely the product of academic rigor, but of a deeply ingrained discomfort with alternative religious histories that challenge Christian orthodoxy. The material exists, but it is scattered, fragmented, and cloaked in obscurity. In 1945, the discovery of the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt briefly cracked open the door. Among the codices were references to angels, aeons, and watchers, not by name, but by role and function. Several passages from the Apocryphon of John, for example, describe a group of divine beings who descended into the material world to help awaken the divine spark in humanity, only to be cursed and cast into shadow by the demiurgic creator. Though the language differs from the traditional Enochian framework, the essence remains the same. Heavenly beings punished for illuminating mankind. In Ethiopia, the complete Book of Enoch has been preserved for centuries by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which considers it canonical. This version, known as 1 Enoch, contains entire sections describing the descent of the Watchers, their union with human women, and their teaching of forbidden knowledge. But what's curious is how little attention this text receives from Western Christianity, despite its clear connections to early biblical narratives. Attempts to integrate it into mainstream theological discourse have been resisted, and translations of the text have often been downplayed or abridged. This selective blindness is not neutral, it is strategic. In the modern era, another layer of suppression has emerged: cultural distraction. The Watchers have been quietly relegated to the realm of fantasy, horror, and science fiction. Films, television series, and novels incorporate their imagery: fallen angels, ancient alien teachers, luminous beings exiled from heaven, but strip it of its spiritual potency. By transforming the Watchers into entertainment, their reality is diluted. Their story becomes symbolic, mythological, no longer worthy of serious inquiry. This tactic ensures that even when the truth is presented openly, it is no longer recognized for what it is. Yet for those who look deeper, the evidence remains persistent. Declassified CIA documents have revealed an unusual fascination with ancient spiritual systems, including Enochian linguistics and angelic hierarchies. Occult orders such as the Golden Dawn, the Theosophical Society, and modern initiatory schools have claimed to preserve teachings originating with the Watchers, albeit in veiled and symbolic language. Their rituals, diagrams, and invocations often align with what little we know from Enochic texts and apocryphal fragments. It is unlikely this is coincidence. The persistence of the Watchers in the collective unconscious points to something more than myth. Why do their names, Azazel, Semjaza, Armaros, continue to resurface in grimoires, rituals, and visionary experiences? Why do so many esoteric traditions independently describe luminous beings who descended, taught, and were cursed? If the story were truly fiction, its thread should have broken long ago. But it has not. It is stitched into the fabric of forbidden knowledge, a quiet current beneath the surface of official history. Even today, private collectors and underground libraries hold fragments believed to be linked to the lost gospel. Pages surfaced in 1987 from a Coptic scroll referencing the Fathers of Flame, described as radiant beings who fell like meteors and brought with them the names of power. Though dismissed by most as poetic metaphor, some linguists have argued that the syntax and cosmology within these fragments bear striking resemblance to pre-Christian Gnostic liturgy. If authenticated, they may represent one of the last surviving echoes of the Gospel of the Watchers. The suppression has never been total. The truth leaks, through cracks in the wall, through footnotes, through the testimonies of the damned. It is scattered across disciplines and geographies, waiting for those willing to sift through the ashes of history to retrieve the fragments. The Watchers may be buried, but they are not gone. Their story survives in whispers, in warnings, and in the secret places where the light still flickers behind locked doors. Though the Gospel of the Watchers remains lost to official history and buried beneath layers of theological suppression, its essence continues to surface in the cultural bloodstream of the modern world. Like a repressed memory breaking through the subconscious, the core narrative of luminous beings descending from the heavens to bring forbidden knowledge to humanity echoes throughout literature, film, art, and conspiracy theory. This is not accidental. The mythos of the Watchers, whether acknowledged directly or not, has become a persistent archetype, a symbolic framework that shapes how we understand rebellion, illumination, exile, and divine transgression. In this way, the forgotten gospel exerts a powerful gravitational pull on popular culture, subtly reawakening the very truths it was meant to erase. One of the most prominent reflections of this narrative is found in the enduring fascination with fallen angels across all mediums. From Gothic literature to blockbuster cinema, the trope of the beautiful, exiled being cast down for defying authority has become ubiquitous. Films like Legion, Constantine, and The Prophecy depict angels not as flawless servants of heaven, but as conflicted entities wrestling with duty, morality, and knowledge. The figure of Lucifer, long portrayed as the embodiment of evil, has been reframed as a misunderstood anti-hero, particularly in television series such as Lucifer, where the morning star is shown as a reluctant ruler of hell, unjustly vilified for questioning divine judgment. Though these stories take artistic liberties, they preserve the underlying theme of the Watchers, divine descent as a form of enlightenment. In science fiction, the Watchers re-emerge under different names. In Ridley Scott's Prometheus, ancient aliens are portrayed as humanity's progenitors, bringing life and knowledge to early humans before being rejected and exiled. The engineers of that film closely mirror the Watchers in both intent and consequence, beings who transgress boundaries to uplift mankind, only to be punished or forgotten. Similarly, the Matrix trilogy presents a Gnostic worldview in which the material world is a simulation controlled by malevolent forces, and liberation comes through knowledge, self-awareness, and sacrifice. Neo, like the Watchers, descends into the illusion to awaken others, challenging the tyrannical system from within. These narratives resonate deeply not just because they are compelling, but because they tap into something ancient, the suppressed myth of those who fell not out of pride, but compassion. Video games also carry this motif. In the Assassin's Creed series, for instance, humanity is revealed to have been guided and manipulated by a race of godlike precursors who brought advanced knowledge and technology before being nearly wiped out. The symbolism of the forbidden apple, the secrets encoded in DNA, and the battle between hidden knowledge and institutional control all trace their lineage to the Watchers' mythos. Even in fantasy role-playing games like Diablo and Final Fantasy, beings resembling the Watchers appear under different guises, often positioned as morally ambiguous figures who blur the lines between salvation and damnation. Beyond entertainment, the Watchers' legacy has also seeped into modern spirituality and occult practice. New Age movements frequently invoke themes of starseeds, ascended masters, and interdimensional guides who bring higher wisdom to humanity. While these figures are often sanitized and rebranded, they retain the core attributes of the Watchers. They are beings of light, exiled from their origin, seeking to help humanity evolve beyond its current limitations. Channelers, mystics, and spiritual teachers speak of cosmic wars, vibrational ascension, and ancient knowledge long suppressed by religious institutions. Whether consciously or unconsciously, these narratives mirror the esoteric framework established by the lost gospel. conspiracy theories have also become a modern vehicle for the Watcher's story. The idea that secret elites, ancient bloodlines, or religious orders have hidden the truth about human origins aligns perfectly with the notion of a gospel deliberately buried by institutional power. Theories surrounding the Anunnaki, reptilian overlords, or hidden archives beneath the Vatican all point to a common intuition: that what we have been taught is a sanitized version of reality, and that forbidden knowledge lies just beyond reach. The Watchers function as a symbolic stand-in for this hidden truth. A reminder that behind every dogma lies a question that was never meant to be asked. Even in academic and philosophical circles, the archetype of the Watcher has found expression. Writers like Carl Jung explored the concept of the shadow self, the parts of the psyche that are repressed by conscious thought and societal norms. The Watchers, as bearers of forbidden knowledge, can be seen as externalizations of that shadow, agents of individuation who force humanity to confront uncomfortable truths. Joseph Campbell's hero's journey begins with a call to adventure often delivered by a mysterious figure bearing wisdom from outside the system. This, too, echoes the role of the Watchers: initiators, guides, catalysts of transformation who lead the seeker into the unknown. Art and music have also been deeply influenced. The recurring image of the eye, the winged being, the serpent, and the blazing star are symbols associated with both enlightenment and taboo. Bands, painters, and filmmakers who delve into occult themes often use Watcher iconography without naming it, relying instead on its visual power to evoke a sense of the forbidden. The line between inspiration and invocation becomes blurred, as the cultural memory of the Watchers reasserts itself through symbol and sound. What makes this connection to modern culture so profound is its subtlety. The Watchers are rarely named directly, their gospel is never quoted in full, but the essence of their story continues to be told, retold, and reinterpreted. It lives in our myths of aliens, our tales of forbidden love, our quests for knowledge, and our fear of unseen rulers. It lives in our fascination with apocalyptic revelations, ancient gods, and fallen stars. Whether wrapped in fiction, filtered through metaphor, or buried in satire, the Watchers remain present, watching, waiting, and whispering. This enduring presence suggests that their story was never truly lost. It was only transformed. Suppressed by the pulpit but resurrected by the screen, exiled from scripture but enthroned in imagination, the gospel of the Watchers continues its strange resurrection in the collective dream of humanity. It reminds us that even when truth is silenced, it will find new ways to speak, through vision, symbol, and story. And perhaps, as our age of information begins to collapse under the weight of disillusionment, the world will once again be ready to hear the voice of the exiled. If the gospel of the Watchers is more than myth, if even fragments of its message are true, then the consequences for humanity's understanding of divinity, history, and spiritual authority are seismic. What has long been presented as a cosmic battle between good and evil, between God and Satan, collapses into something far more complex and deeply unsettling. The traditional narrative that underpins monotheistic religion, that obedience is righteousness, that rebellion is sin, that knowledge is dangerous, and that the divine is distant and singular, unravels in the presence of the Watcher's testimony. What emerges instead is a story of multidimensional consciousness, divine plurality, cosmic injustice, and a forgotten war in which the victors wrote the doctrine and the defeated were demonized, buried, and cast out of memory. This is the truth they fear: that humanity was not created to obey, but to awaken. The core thread of the Watcher's gospel lies in its subversion of absolute spiritual authority. If the Watchers brought knowledge, compassion, and light, then those who punished them did so to maintain control, not to uphold divine order. The supposed rebellion becomes a revolution, the fall becomes a sacrifice, and at the center of it all stands the most controversial figure of all, Lucifer, not as the enemy of God, but as a bearer of light who refused to remain silent while humanity was shackled by ignorance. The very name Lucifer, meaning light-bringer, reflects this original identity, long before it was conflated with Satan through centuries of doctrinal distortion. In the Gospel of the Watchers, he is not a deceiver, but a revealer, not a destroyer, but a liberator, a being who descended into matter not to corrupt, but to awaken. If this figure, this Watcher, this emissary of lost light, is not evil incarnate, but the suppressed divine, then the implications ripple outward into every corner of theology and tradition. It suggests that the biblical God, or at least the image of him presented through institutional religion, is not the sole author of creation, but a competing force within a larger cosmological hierarchy. That the material world, rather than being a flawless work of divine benevolence, is a flawed construct, shaped by struggle and compromise, perhaps even by deception. It suggests that humanity itself is not merely the passive creation of a distant god, but the heir to a cosmic legacy, a hybrid being infused with divine sparks and designed not for worship, but for sovereignty. The truth they fear is not just that the Watchers existed, but that they succeeded, at least partially. The forbidden knowledge they gave to humanity is not gone. It is hidden in plain sight, coded into myth, symbol, geometry, and language. It lives in the disciplines of sacred science, alchemy, astrology, mysticism, and meditation. It lives in the stories of those who dared to challenge orthodoxy, from the Gnostic heretics, to the mystics burned at the stake, to the visionaries who glimpsed other worlds and were silenced for what they saw. The Watchers did not simply fall from heaven. They seeded the world with a virus of awakening, an invitation to see beyond the veil, to question the official version, to seek the deeper patterns beneath the dogma. This is why their gospel had to be destroyed. Not because it was false, but because it offered an alternative, an open door to a spiritual reality that does not depend on priests, temples, or sacred institutions. A reality in which every human being carries within them the capacity to commune with the divine directly, to access higher dimensions of consciousness, to remember who they were before they were told who to be. In this reality, salvation is not granted, it is realized. Divinity is not above us, it is within. And the ultimate blasphemy becomes the act of questioning a system that demands silence. The institutions built on centuries of spiritual control cannot allow this truth to surface. Their survival depends on hierarchy, on mediators between man and God, on texts they alone interpret. A worldview in which the Watchers were right, in which Lucifer was illuminating rather than corrupting, threatens every pillar of authority they have constructed. It undermines the logic of sin, the necessity of obedience, and the monopoly on sacredness. It turns faith into experience, authority into suggestion, and doctrine into myth. It turns history into a battlefield not of good and evil, but of competing truths, some exalted, others extinguished. But the most dangerous truth of all, the one that sits at the heart of the Watcher's message, is this: humanity was never meant to be ruled. The divine spark within us is not a sin, it is a birthright. The fall was not a punishment, it was the beginning of awareness. The exile from Eden was not a curse, but the first step towards sovereignty. And those who have spent centuries trying to erase this truth know that if it ever returns to the collective mind, their power dissolves. Because the only real prison is belief, and the only real escape is knowledge. The Watchers are not coming. They never left. They are part of a living current of consciousness that flows beneath the surface of human history. Every time someone asks what lies beyond the official story, every time a seeker turns away from dogma and looks inward, every time a forgotten text is unearthed and read with new eyes, the Watchers speak again, not from the heavens, but from the space within us where memory, myth, and mystery converge. This is the truth they fear, not because it is dark, but because it is liberating. Not because it is dangerous in itself, but because it is uncontrollable. It cannot be regulated, taxed, weaponized, or domesticated. It belongs to no one and yet to everyone. And that, above all else, is what makes it the most heretical truth of all. A truth whispered in silence, encoded in symbol, buried beneath centuries of fire and ash, but never truly extinguished. A truth waiting, like embers in the ruins of forgotten temples, for breath enough to burn again. If you have followed the trail this far, through the ruins of forgotten texts and the echoes of forbidden truths, then you are no longer just a viewer. You are a seeker, and in seeking, you have already stepped beyond the veil that was drawn to keep you obedient, silent, and blind. The path of awakening does not begin with answers. It begins with the willingness to question, to trace the outline of what was erased, to listen not to what was preached from pulpits, but to what was whispered in shadows. What was buried was never dead. What was condemned was never false. The gospel of the Watchers may remain hidden, but its light flickers through you now, stirring the part of you that remembers what it means to see. You were never meant to kneel. You were meant to rise, and in rising to reclaim the sacred fire that was gifted, not stolen. The fire they tried to extinguish with fear, shame, and silence. The fire that still burns in those who refuse to forget. You are not alone in this journey. Across time, others have walked this path. Initiates, heretics, mystics, and madmen, each carrying a fragment of the whole. Each protecting a truth too dangerous for the world to accept, and too vital to let die. If what you have seen resonates with something ancient within you, if your soul stirs at the thought that the divine is not a throne above, but a flame within, then consider this your initiation. Not into belief, but into awareness. Not into dogma, but into remembrance. Subscribe not to a channel, but to a current. A current that flows beneath every suppressed idea, every forbidden word, every hidden name. Here, we do not ask for faith. We invite you to question. We do not offer salvation. We offer sight. The circle is open. The silence is breaking. And what was once occult will not remain hidden forever. Subscribe to Occultum Veritas. Enter the circle, and let the truth remember you.